I used to work the night shift at a gas station because I was short on cash and needed a second job to make ends meet. I had been doing this for a couple of months when, one night, this guy started showing up regularly, always around 2 o'clock in the morning. He was a tall man, probably about 6 feet, with long, stringy hair that looked like it had not been washed in a while. Every time, he would walk in, grab a tall can of beer, pay for it, and leave without much of a word. After a few visits, though, he finally struck up a conversation. One night, as I rang up his usual tall boy, he asked me what my name was. I told him, "My name is Joe." He grinned, a sloppy sort of grin, and said, "Joe. I like that name," laughing to himself like it was some kind of joke only he got. Then he cracked open the beer he had just bought, took a swig, and walked out the door, muttering something under his breath. That was the first time I wondered if he had been drinking and driving. But as I watched him leave, I noticed he did not head toward any parked car. He just walked off the gas station lot and disappeared into the night. It made sense, he never once bought gas during any of his visits. He just came in, bought his beer, and left. Over the next few weeks, he became a regular. He showed up most nights, sometimes clearly more drunk than others. He would greet me with a slurred, "Hey, Joe," and then stumble around the store for a while before finally grabbing his usual beer. Occasionally, he would lean against one of the shelves and just stand there silently, staring at the floor or a random spot on the wall. One night, as he leaned on a shelf and drank his beer without saying much, I decided to ask him his name. He stared at me for a few seconds, like he was trying to remember, and then said, Bob. Now, I have always thought Bob sounded like one of those fake names people use when they do not want to give their real name. Maybe he picked it because it rhymed with my name, but I just went along with it. "So, Bob, where do you work?" I asked. He let out this booming laugh that startled me. "Work?" he scoffed. "Man, I do not work anymore. The government screwed me out of my job." His mood shifted quickly. He stared at me with this strange, angry expression and said, "But I like you, Joe. You seem like you know what you are doing." I had no idea what he meant by that, but before I could ask, he turned and walked out of the store. That was the last I saw of him for a while, over a week, maybe more. For someone who came in almost every night, his absence was noticeable. Bob had always given me a strange vibe, like something about his life was just off. But one particularly stormy night, when hardly any customers were coming in because of the weather, the front door chimed, and I had this weird feeling it was going to be him. Sure enough, it was Bob, but he looked different, scarier. He was completely soaked, like he had been walking in the rain for hours with no umbrella or jacket. His dark shirt and jeans clung to him, and his long hair hung in wet strands. He stood by the door, staring at the wall, not moving or saying a word. "Bob," I called out, "are you okay?" He did not respond at first. Then, without turning his head, he muttered, "I did something really bad." My stomach dropped. "What did you do?" I asked cautiously. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes glassy and strange. "I need somewhere to hide," he said, then walked past me toward the hallway where the restrooms were. I heard one of the doors creak open and shut behind him. I was officially creeped out. Bob had always been a little weird, but tonight was different. There was something off, something dark. I decided to leave him alone, figuring he was either drunk, sick, or both. Then, the power went out. The whole store was plunged into darkness, with only the sound of the storm raging outside. My heart started pounding. I grabbed the flashlight we kept behind the counter and made my way toward the back of the store where the circuit breaker was. As I passed the restroom doors, I noticed both were slightly open. I peeked inside, but Bob was not in either one. I went through the door to the back, planning to head straight for the circuit panel. As I stepped inside, I froze. The room was dark, and I could hear a faint dripping sound somewhere, along with the unmistakable squeak of wet shoes. My stomach dropped. I swallowed hard and called out, "Bob?" My voice came out weak and shaky. That was when I heard it, the squeak of shoes, right to my left. I quickly swung the flashlight toward the corner of the room. There he was, Bob. His eyes were wide, wild, and staring straight at me. Before I could react, he lunged at me, screaming at the top of his lungs, "I am going to kill you." Panic shot through me as he grabbed at me, clawing at my back like some kind of animal. I shoved him off with all my strength and bolted back through the door to the front of the store. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. When I reached the counter, I grabbed my rain jacket and made a run for the exit. I did not look back. I sprinted straight to my car, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my phone to dial 911. The operator's voice was calm, which helped steady me a little. I stayed on the line with her until 2 police officers arrived. They went into the store with me, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. We found Bob in the back room, huddled in a corner like a feral animal. His pupils were huge, and his whole body was trembling. That was when it hit me, he was definitely on something. The officers managed to detain him without much struggle. After I explained that he had attacked me, threatened to kill me, and admitted to doing something really bad, they took him to the station. It was over a month later when I found out who Bob really was. His real name was Martin, and he had brutally beaten his ex-wife to death. From what the police told me, it probably happened that same stormy night he came into the gas station. To say the whole thing shook me up would be an understatement. After that night, I swore I would never work another night shift at any job, ever again. Looking back, it is not like I had never been out late before. I did a lot of night driving in my younger days, though not for work. Back in my late teens and early 20s, my friends and I thought it was cool to stay out until 5 o'clock in the morning, hanging out in parks or parking lots. To be honest, we were kind of losers back then, thinking we were living some grand, carefree life. Now, I cannot help but wonder what kind of dangers we might have been walking into without even realizing it. Life has a funny way of throwing surprises at you, and sometimes they are the kind that shake you to your core. I have had my fair share of strange encounters, but this one still stands out as the most terrifying. It happened on a weekend night, back in the mid-1960s, in the Atlanta area. At that time, I was about 8 or 9 years old. My dad was a schoolteacher, and we lived some distance away from the school where he worked. Since I attended the same school, we would drive there together every morning, long before the sun came up. We had a routine. A few mornings each week, we would stop at a small, independent gas station to top off the tank. It was a full-service station, as was common back then, and the attendant would handle everything, from filling the tank to washing the windshield. This particular morning started like any other. It was still dark outside when we pulled into the station, the first customers of the day. Fast forward to my teenage years, and I was used to driving late at night. It was not by choice but because life often required it. Those late hours are when the roads belong to the night owls, the partiers, and, sometimes, the unhinged. One weekend night, it had to be close to 4 in the morning. I was exhausted and ready to head home after dropping off a friend I had been hanging out with at the park. Before calling it a night, I needed gas. I used to prefer getting gas at night because it meant no crowds, no waiting, just in and out. I pulled into a gas station not far from my parents' house, one of my usual spots. As I got out of the car and headed to the building to pay, I noticed a short guy wearing a hood walking past me. He stopped dead in his tracks and locked eyes with me. His stare was unsettling. "What is it?" I said, continuing to walk. He said nothing, just stood there. I brushed it off, assuming he was just another oddball wandering the streets at night. Once inside, I paid the attendant for the gas and decided to grab a lottery ticket while I was at it. Returning to my car, I filled up, all the while appreciating the quiet emptiness of the station. With the tank full, I got back in the car and started driving home. Everything seemed normal until, halfway there, I heard a noise coming from behind me. My heart stopped. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my blood turned to ice. Sitting in the back seat, staring right at me, was the guy from the gas station. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life and slammed on the brakes. My car skidded to a stop as I yelled, "Get out! Get out of my car!" He smirked, leaned forward, and said, "I could have slit your throat." That was it for me. I flung open my door and started shouting for help at the top of my lungs, hoping someone would hear me. Porch lights flicked on, and a few doors opened as neighbors came outside to investigate the commotion. Seeing the attention, the guy scrambled out of my car and bolted down the street. I did not bother chasing him. I was too shaken to do anything but stand there, trying to catch my breath. A few people came over to check on me, and I explained what had happened. By the time I got back in the car, the man was long gone, swallowed up by the night. I thanked the neighbors for their kindness and drove home, keeping a wary eye on the road and my surroundings the entire way. To this day, that night haunts me. It was a stark reminder of how quickly things can go from mundane to life-altering. I still do not know what that man's intentions were, and honestly, I am glad I never found out. When I was 25, there was this gas station my dad and I used to stop at regularly. It had these big glass windows and tiny bathrooms tucked behind the pumps. The attendant there was a tall guy with a thick mustache who always carried a wad of bills in his pocket and one of those coin-counting devices clipped to his belt. The drive to our destination was long, so I often used the bathroom there when we stopped in the mornings. One particular morning, we arrived before dawn, and something felt off right away. The whole place was eerily quiet, except for the sound of traffic whizzing by on the highway. No one was in the booth, and there was no sign of the attendant anywhere. My dad honked the horn once, then again, a few more times, but there was no response. We sat there, puzzled, tossing around ideas about what might have happened. My dad suggested the attendant could be in the bathroom, but when he still did not show up, he figured maybe the guy's car had broken down, and he could not get to work on time. We waited for a few more minutes, but no other cars pulled in, and it was still dead quiet. I told my dad I really needed to use the bathroom and started to open the car door, but he stopped me. He said we could not wait any longer and that I could use the restroom at the next gas station. Reluctantly, I closed the door, and we drove off, still wondering what was going on. A day or two later, my dad was reading the local newspaper when he let out a loud, startled sound. He called my mom and me over, pointing to a small article on the page. The article said that the body of a gas station attendant had been discovered in the men's bathroom at that very station. He had been stabbed multiple times, and the motive appeared to be robbery. All the cash and coins were gone. The article did not say how much money was taken, but it could not have been much. Still, that did not stop whoever did it. I remember sitting there in shock, thinking about how close I came to walking into that bathroom that morning. I kept wondering how I would have handled it at that age if I had opened that door and found the body of the murdered attendant. We never went back to that gas station again. I was driving through Texas, heading south, and because of my work schedule, I had to make the trip late at night. I spent most of the drive on Route 281, and at that hour, the road was pretty quiet and straight. I just had to fight to stay awake. After a long day of work, getting on the road right after was exhausting. I had to stop at almost every gas station to grab some coffee to keep me going. I think it was about my third stop when I started feeling a bit drowsy again. Plus, my gas tank was getting low. I pulled off onto a quiet side road and found the first gas station I could. I can't quite remember which one it was, maybe a Sunoco or a Shell. There was only one other car parked in the lot. I pulled up to the pump and went inside. There were two people in there, one was the cashier, and the other guy was pacing up and down the aisles. I grabbed my coffee, and the pacing guy walked over to me. He said, "Careful, it's hot," and then just walked off. It was such a weird, pointless attempt at a conversation that I wasn't in the mood for. I didn't even acknowledge him. I took my coffee up to the counter and paid for it along with the gas. The guy came up behind me while I was paying and said, "I really like that shirt." I just said, "Thank you," loud enough for him to hear. Then he asked, "Where are you headed at this time of night?" By then, I was really fed up and asked him to leave me alone. The cashier, a man in his 40s, was watching, but I couldn't tell if he understood what was going on or if he even cared. He was a smaller guy, and I doubted he was going to intervene. The guy behind me said, "Calm down," but I had already had enough. I didn't say another word and left the shop. I headed straight for my car, ready to fill up the tank. As I started pumping gas, I heard the door to the shop open again. I looked over and saw the guy standing just on the other side of the pump. He wasn't getting gas, there was no car. He was just standing there, watching me. I started to think about grabbing my pepper spray from the center console, just in case. He asked, "Are you alone?" That's when things took a turn. I quickly replied, "No, my boyfriend's in the car." I opened the door and grabbed the pepper spray, holding it at my side like I was still focused on pumping gas. The guy started moving around the pump, like he was trying to get to my side. He said, "I don't see anyone in the car." That's when I pulled out the pepper spray and aimed it at him. He backed off and laughed, saying he was just trying to make conversation. But he kept walking backward, his eyes still locked on me. As I finished pumping the gas, I heard the pump click off. It was full. I still had about $6 in change, so I needed to go inside to get it. The guy was standing between the shop and me. I had to make a choice. I decided to go back inside. I kept the pepper spray pointed in his direction as I walked toward the door. He continued to back away, laughing like it was all a joke. Once I was safe and inside, I asked the cashier for change. I told him the guy had made me really uncomfortable, but it seemed like he didn't fully understand what I was saying. After I got my change, I looked through the glass door into the parking lot, just to make sure I was safe before I left. When I stepped outside, I didn't see the guy anywhere. I was still on edge, wondering if he was hiding somewhere nearby. I stood on the sidewalk in front of the store, not daring to leave the safety of it just yet. I looked around, but he was nowhere in sight, which only made me more sure that he had been hiding. After a little while, a pickup truck pulled into the lot and parked by one of the pumps. A big guy with a beard got out, and I immediately walked over to him. I asked if he could check behind my car to make sure that creepy guy wasn't hiding there. He looked confused but agreed to help. The man walked to the other side of my car, and I heard him shout, "What are you doing?" That's when the guy I'd been worried about suddenly came rushing out from behind my car, trying to run off into the dark. The big man yelled after him, but the guy just kept running. The guy in the truck turned to me and said in a thick southern drawl, "Be careful out here." I didn't need to hear anything else. I was out of that parking lot in a flash and back on the road. Looking back, I know that man had been waiting for the right moment to make his move, probably the second I unlocked my car doors. It's a chilling thought that still haunts me.